Most people don't fail because they never start. They fail because they pause. They fail in the quiet moment right after a tiny victory, when the world expects them to push harder, but they don't. This is the momentum gap, that invisible space where the fire begins to dim, where the mind whispers, "You did enough for today," and where dreams quietly lose their rhythm. You see, every small win has the power to lift you, but it also has the power to trick you. It convinces you that progress means permission to slow down. It convinces you that one step forward is a sign to rest, when in reality, it's a signal to accelerate. The truth is, the gap between your potential and your reality isn't formed by failures. It's formed by pauses disguised as victories. And if you don't learn how to guard your momentum, even your brightest moments will become the reason you stop instead of the reason you rise. Today, I want to open your eyes to the hidden cycle that silently steals energy from millions of people, and more importantly, how you can break it before it breaks you. Key point number 1 focuses on the momentum gap, a silent force that affects almost everyone without them even realizing it. The momentum gap is that strange space between effort and achievement where motivation should grow stronger, but instead begins to fade. It happens right after a small win, when you complete a task, reach a milestone, or finally get something right. And instead of using that energy to push forward, you unconsciously ease up. The mind relaxes, the urgency fades, and the drive that got you moving in the first place starts to cool down. This gap isn't caused by laziness. It's caused by psychology. The brain is wired to reward itself after any form of progress. And because of that, it often confuses some progress with finished progress. When you get a little success, the brain releases a small burst of satisfaction, and that feeling tricks you into thinking you've done enough, even when the bigger mission is far from complete. That's why so many people begin with fire and end with excuses. They don't lose ability, they lose momentum. Another reason the momentum gap is so powerful is because small wins can create a false sense of confidence. Once someone achieves a tiny step forward, they feel like they're back in control, like the worst is behind them. That feeling is comforting, but comfort is often the enemy of consistency. When a person gets comfortable, the intensity drops. When intensity drops, habits weaken. And when habits weaken, results slow down. The momentum gap grows wider every time you celebrate too long or relax too early. It's the silent killer of long-term success because it doesn't feel like failure. It feels like rest, reward, or relief. And because it feels good, you don't notice how much it's stealing from you. The momentum gap also affects identity. After a small win, people tend to identify more with the feeling of progress rather than the process of progress. They start believing they're doing great instead of reminding themselves they're just getting started. This mindset shift is dangerous because momentum is built on repeated action, not occasional achievement. The truth is, progress is supposed to create pressure. The pressure to keep going, to capitalize on the energy you built, to push while the wheels are already turning. But most people treat progress like permission to slow down, which snaps the cycle and forces them to restart again and again. Understanding this gap is the first step to overcoming it, because once you can see how easily momentum slips, you can start guarding it with the intensity it deserves. Key point number 2 explores the comfort trap, a psychological shift that happens right after someone experiences a small win. It's the moment when your mind, instead of pushing you to build on what you started, slowly guides you toward relaxation. This isn't because you're weak or uncommitted. It's because the human brain is programmed to seek comfort and reward. When you accomplish something, even something tiny, your brain releases a wave of satisfaction that feels like a signal to slow down. That feeling creates a sense of safety, like you've already achieved enough for now, and that subtle shift can be deadly for long-term progress. The comfort trap is powerful because it doesn't arrive as a warning. It arrives as relief. It convinces you that taking your foot off the gas is harmless, when in reality, it's the very thing that breaks your momentum. The comfort trap often shows up in the form of justifications. After a small success, people start telling themselves they deserve a break. They'll continue later, or that they've already done more than most. These thoughts feel positive, but they sabotage the drive that created the win in the first place. Small wins are meant to energize you, but comfort absorbs that energy and converts it into stagnation. Over time, this trap becomes a cycle, a burst of effort, a moment of success, a wave of comfort, and then a slowdown that wipes out all the intensity you built. By the time you try to start again, the spark is gone, the urgency is gone, and you're forced to use even more energy just to return to the level you were already at before you relaxed. That's why people get frustrated with themselves. They think they lack discipline, but the truth is they allowed comfort to interrupt their momentum before momentum could turn into transformation. Comfort is also dangerous because it creates illusions. It makes you believe you're still on track, even when you've quietly stopped moving. It makes a tiny step forward feel like a giant leap, causing you to mistake the beginning of progress for the completion of progress. The comfort trap blinds you to how much work is still ahead, and it tricks you into believing you can pick up where you left off whenever you want. But momentum is not something you can pause and resume at the same strength. Once you slow down, the energy cools, the focus fades, and the drive weakens. The trap works so well because it feels good, but that good feeling is exactly what steals the consistency you need for real growth. Recognizing this pattern allows you to resist the temptation of early comfort and stay committed to the deeper path of continuous progress. Key point number 3 focuses on the hidden cycle, a repeating loop that quietly keeps people stuck even when they believe they're doing everything right. The cycle begins with effort. Someone gets motivated, sets a goal, and puts in the energy to move forward. This effort leads to a small win, something that feels like progress, even if it's just the beginning. That small win creates excitement, confidence, and a sense of possibility. But right after that moment, something subtle happens. The pace slows. The urgency fades. The mind shifts from, I must keep going, to, I'm doing fine, I can ease up now. And that tiny shift, so small most people never notice it, is what begins the hidden cycle. When the slowdown hits, the intensity drops, and habits begin to weaken. That weakened state leads to stagnation. People assume they're still moving forward because they plan to continue, but they're actually standing still. Days pass. Motivation cools. The fire that was burning bright starts to dim. Eventually, guilt kicks in. They realize they haven't followed through, and that realization pushes them back to the start, where they feel the need to restart the effort all over again. This is the hidden cycle. Effort, small win, relaxation, stagnation, restart. Over and over. It's exhausting, frustrating, and it convinces people that something is wrong with them when the real problem is simply momentum being left unprotected. What makes this cycle dangerous is that each loop feels familiar and logical. Someone works hard, gets tired, feels good about doing something, and decides to rest. That rest feels deserved, so they don't question it. But rest taken too early becomes a trap. Instead of fueling momentum, it interrupts it. And each time the cycle repeats, it becomes harder to restart with the same energy. People begin to label themselves as inconsistent or unmotivated, not realizing they've just trained their mind to associate progress with slowing down rather than speeding up. It's not a lack of potential holding them back. It's the pattern they've unconsciously followed for years. The hidden cycle also creates emotional confusion. Every time someone restarts, they feel hopeful, but every time they slow down again, they feel disappointed. These emotional highs and lows drain confidence and create the illusion that success is unstable or unpredictable. In reality, the cycle is predictable. It happens the same way every time because the mind has learned to attach comfort to progress instead of attaching urgency to progress. Breaking this cycle requires awareness because once you can see the loop clearly, you can interrupt it at the exact point where most people fall back. Protecting your momentum before it disappears again. Key point number 4 dives into the difference between identity and action and why this distinction plays a massive role in whether a small win becomes fuel or a full stop. Most people don't realize that every action they take is shaping how they see themselves. and how they see themselves determines how consistently they continue. After a small win, people often shift into a mindset where they feel proud of what they've done, but instead of letting that pride strengthen their identity, they let it inflate their ego. The ego says, "You're doing great, you're ahead, you've earned a break," while identity says, "This is who you are now, keep building." When a win feeds ego, momentum slows. When a win feeds identity, momentum grows. The problem is that the ego is louder in the short term, and it's much more tempting. That immediate satisfaction feels like progress, but it's actually the beginning of the slowdown. Identity is built through repeated actions, and the real reason momentum fades is because people use small wins to justify stopping the very behaviors that created the win in the first place. If someone works out one day and feels good about it, they may start to think of themselves as someone who's getting back on track, but that identity only becomes real through consistency. If they stop, the identity disappears just as quickly as the progress. This is why so many people feel stuck. Their identity is fragile, built on occasional effort rather than sustained action. When identity is fragile, every win feels temporary. But when identity is strong, every win becomes evidence that you're becoming someone new. Action might give you a moment of pride, but identity gives you momentum that lasts. Another problem is that people often use wins to escape the discomfort that growth requires. They believe progress should feel easier over time, but real identity change often feels harder before it feels natural. Small wins release enough dopamine to make you feel like you've already transformed, even though you've only taken one step. That emotional high is deceptive, and it tricks you into thinking your identity has already shifted. But identity doesn't change in a moment. It changes in the repetition of moments. The key is understanding that transformation is not measured by how you feel after a win, but by how you behave after a win. If the win makes you feel done, your identity weakens. If the win makes you feel capable, your identity strengthens. People who break the momentum gap do it because they attach meaning to every win. They see each tiny step as proof of who they're becoming, not a sign to relax. They use progress as confirmation, not completion. They build an identity that can carry them forward, even on the days when motivation isn't strong. And that identity becomes the engine that keeps momentum alive. Key point number 5 focuses on breaking the pattern, the exact shift that turns small wins into momentum instead of momentum killers. Most people repeat the same cycle for years without ever questioning it. But the truth is that the moment you understand how this pattern works, you gain the power to interrupt it. Breaking the pattern starts with awareness. Recognizing that the drop in energy you feel after a small win isn't natural, it's conditioned. Your mind has learned to associate progress with permission to slow down. So the first step is retraining that association. Instead of viewing a small win as an endpoint, you begin to treat it as a launch pad. You start reminding yourself that progress is not a finish line, but a signal to continue. This mental shift is what stops the cycle from resetting and forces the mind to build a new rhythm. Breaking the pattern also requires replacing relief with responsibility. When you achieve something, even something tiny, the instinctive desire is to relax. But growth begins when you replace that instinct with a new question. What's the next step? This doesn't mean destroying yourself with nonstop work. It means protecting the momentum you create. Momentum doesn't demand extreme effort. It demands consistent effort. It demands that you show up again before the energy cools. When you take a small win and follow it with another action, no matter how small, you teach your mind a new message. Success means continuing, not stopping. Over time, this becomes automatic. You begin to crave progress instead of comfort. You start building patterns that drive you forward instead of patterns that put you back at the starting line every time. Another way to break the pattern is by setting micro-commitments that keep the momentum alive. These are small promises you make to yourself that are too simple to break, but powerful enough to strengthen discipline. When you create a system where each win leads directly into the next step, you remove the space where momentum usually dies. And as you repeat this cycle of action, your identity grows stronger. You shift from someone who starts and stops to someone who follows through. That identity becomes your new standard, and once your standard rises, the old cycle loses its power. You realize that momentum isn't something you find. It's something you build through behavior, repetition, and refusal to pause when the average person pauses. Breaking the pattern means choosing long-term growth over short-term comfort, choosing discipline over the dopamine rush, and choosing to keep moving even when stopping feels easier. So if you found this powerful, then make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.